everyone, this is Lomi, and this week I'm sharing how to make another fantasy dress for a minifee. This one is 2 pieces, an underdress and an overdress, and I'm actually not covering the overdress in this video because it's the same pattern as the flowy gown I made for Feeple 65. This just makes an ankle-length gown for minifee. If you want it longer, you'll need to cut the pieces longer, otherwise you can follow that tutorial for the underdress, which I have linked to in the video description. For the overdress, you'll need the bodice pieces in your outer shell fabric and in a lining fabric. I'm using silk for the outer shell, which is still pinned because I'm trying not to handle it much since silk shreds if you so much as breathe on it. I'm using a super thin white lining material, and you can see I have the darts kind of roughly sketched in on these for this video. You'll start with the lining and fold the darts, sewing along where I marked those lines. I pin them both and sew one at a time. You can start at the bottom or at the top, it doesn't matter. Just make sure to leave some long thread tails. Instead of backstitching to lock the stitches in place, I tie a simple overhand knot into the thread and then use a pin to guide the knot down to the fabric. This prevents the fabric in the end of the dart from becoming bulky. Both darts get sewn the same way. After both darts are in, the bodice front pieces and back piece go together, right sides together, and get sewn together at the shoulder. Trim up any loose threads, then it's time to repeat the process with the outer shell fabric. This is an identical process with the exterior fabric, sewing in the darts, making sure the thread is knotted, then sewing the bodice front and back pieces together at the shoulder. Once it's sewn, trim any loose threads, then finger press the seams open. This fabric doesn't get along well with an iron because it's too delicate, but it takes finger pressing well. Next, the lining fabric and the outer shell get put together, right sides together, and pinned along the straight front edge and around the neck curve. Use as many pins as you need, just make sure to take them out as you sew so you don't sew over the top of them. Now we'll sew this in one go, stitching up one straight front edge, around the curved neckline, then down the other front edge. Clip the corners and clip into the curve of the neck so it will lay smoothly when it's turned right side out. Next, pin around the curved armholes, both sides. We'll close them one after the other. Just the armhole curve, leaving the sides of the bodice open for now. Like with the neck, clip into the curve to ensure it'll turn right side out smoothly. Trim loose threads, then it's time to grab a safety pin. Put the pin through the seam allowance along the straight front edge of the bodice. The pin can be tucked in between the two layers of fabric and slid through the shoulder, between the lining and the outer shell. When it comes through, we can grab it and use it to pull the bodice right side out. Do this to turn both sides of the bodice. I use a dowel rod to make sure the corners are turned neatly and that everything lays smooth. Next, we'll close the side seams. Take the open side seam of the bodice front and line it up with the open seam of the back on the same side. These go right sides together. I like to line up the seam where the lining and the outer shell meet so that the bottom of the armhole will align perfectly, then pin the rest. You can see the outer shell fabric goes against itself and the lining goes against itself. Now this can be sewn with one seam to close the side of the bodice without any visible stitches. Repeat the process for the other side. Now the bodice is finished and we can start on the skirt. Even after ironing, my fabric has a terrible crease in it from being folded for so long. Hopefully this drops out after I wash the finished garment. The first step of finishing the skirt would be to finish the edge of the fabric, but this was serged before it was put in storage to prevent fraying, and I'm just going to utilize the serged edges. You can finish the edges with a rolled hem or by using a zigzag stitch along the edge and then folding it in once, whichever you prefer. I am just folding it in by 1/4 inch and pinning it that way since my edge is ready to go. I turn the corner in at an angle and then fold the edges over it so it creates a nicely mitered corner, but you don't have to do it that way. Then I sew the folded side and bottom edges with a regular straight stitch, leaving the top edge of the skirt unfinished. Sometimes I can get my machine to turn nicely at the corner, and sometimes it won't. This time it doesn't want to do it, so I have to cut my thread and start differently, but it does just fine at the second corner. Go figure. Machines can be so picky. If you want to add decorative trim to the skirt, now is the best time to do it. I use my machine to attach some gold metallic trim along the edges. Now the skirt can be gathered. I switch my machine to the longest straight stitch it can do, then sew straight along the unfinished top edge. I sew a little less than 1/4 inch from the edge so that my gathering thread will be inside the finished garment and I won't have to pull it out. To gather the fabric, separate the two threads at the end and choose one, top or bottom thread, and pull the fabric along it to gather. You don't have to pull just from one end, you can pull from both. Just make sure to use the same thread on both sides. After the skirt is gathered, it can be pinned to the bodice with the right sides together, letting the unfinished edge of the skirt and bodice line up together. I pin the ends of the skirt to the ends of the bodice first, then smooth the gathers between those 2 points to make sure they're distributed evenly across the whole width of the skirt. Now this can be sewn together. I fold the lining back out of the way and sew the skirt and just the bodice outer shell together, leaving the lining fabric loose for now. I sew from end to end, and then when I cut the thread to remove this from the machine and turn it right side out, the raw edge of the lining can turn neatly to the inside to create a nicely finished dress. I pin the lining in place so I can sew it down by hand. I use a hand needle and thread to connect the skirt and lining with a hidden stitch, catching just the edge of the lining fabric so none of the thread will show. My hands are really shaky today, and this isn't my most graceful needlework, so I'll spare you from watching the whole thing. I think you get the idea. The last step is adding eyelets or fasteners to the front of the dress. I use a pen to mark 1/2-inch intervals along the front because I'll be using eyelets. But if you don't have the tools, you could also use buttons or hook and eye closures, or just the eyes from the hook and eye closures to lace the front of the bodice shut with ribbon. I use a leather punch to create holes for the eyelets, then use my crocodile eyelet setter to set them. So many people ask about the eyelets I use because they're so tiny, and that's because they don't come from the sewing section of the craft store. These come from the scrapbooking section. They come in lots of colors and different shapes too. After the eyelets are in, the outfit is finished and ready to wear. I love this color on my Minifee, and it matches the dress I made for my little fee Chloe, so now when I get her some purple eyes, she'll work better as an older version of Lulu in addition to a younger version of For All. That's all for today though. Thanks for watching. Bye.